Today we're going to talk about Unit 2, Lesson 5, which is solving quadratics. So there's really 4 ways to solve a quadratic, and we've already talked about 2 of the ways. One is with factoring, so once you get factors, set them equal to 0 and solve for x. So we've done kind of a lot of those. The other way is with the quadratic formula. We talked about quadratic formula a little bit yesterday, but let me give it to you one more time just in case you need it. And that's a formula that we're going to expect you to know. That's not one that we would give to you, so be sure that you're familiar with the quadratic formula, and that is that x equals negative b plus or minus, oops, drew my square root too early, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So you fill in the a, b, and the c from your quadratic, and then that gives you your 2 answers that go along with your quadratic. One will be the negative b plus the square root divided by the 2a, and the other answer will be the negative b minus the square root divided by the 2a. So it gives you the 2 answers to your quadratic. One that a lot of people kind of forget about as you work through is one that I call, or that we call, the square root principle. And you can use this method if you have something that is already in the form of some kind of factor that is squared. Okay, so that's when it's a good time to use this one. For example, if you had something like 4 times x minus 3 squared plus 2 equals 66. Okay, you don't have to go through and square out this square just to be able to solve. You can, but there's a lot easier way. So if you're looking at something that looks like this, I'm kind of already in factored form here. So I'm going to start by just solving this like I would a multi-step algebraic equation. I'm going to subtract over my 2. That's going to give me 64. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 4. So that's going to give me x minus 3 squared is equal to 16. And then I know that the opposite of a square is a square root. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. And when I do that, that's going to leave me with x minus 3 over here. And then be careful, that's going to leave me with plus and minus 4 over here. Okay, so that's how you end up getting the 2 answers for your quadratic, is when you take that square root, it leaves you with a plus or a minus. So I'm going to break that up into x minus 3 is equal to 4, and x minus 3 is equal to negative 4. Okay, and now I can solve. So I'm going to add over my 3 here, gives me 7. And I'm going to add over my 3 on this side, gives me negative 1. Okay, so don't make those square root principle questions too hard. You don't have to square them just to then be able to solve them. Go ahead and just use that square root principle. And then the last method that a lot of people forget about, but we'll come back and use a lot more when we talk about conic sections, is complete the square. And actually, complete the square uses a lot of the pieces of the square root principle in it as well. Okay, so let me give you an example to work with here. Let's start with x squared plus 4x minus 2. So this is kind of a simple one to work with. Okay, so there's steps to go along with completing the square, so I'll talk about those as I go. So my first step, I'm going to move my constant over to the other side. So that's going to give me x squared plus 4x, and I'm going to leave a little bit of space right here, and I'm going to move this negative 2 over to the other side. That's going to make it a positive 2, and then I'm going to put another plus and something right here. Okay, and the reason I've got a plus right here is because I'm about to try to turn this into a perfect square trinomial, or something that if I factored it, I would get some kind of binomial, so x plus or minus something squared. Okay, so that's what I'm kind of working on this side. Then if I do that by adding something on this side, just to keep it balanced, I'm going to need to add something on that side too. Okay, so I'm trying to get this to where I've got, again, something squared on this side is equal to something over here. Okay, so to get this piece, I'm going to bring down my variable, so the square root of x squared just gives me x right there. And then here's where our pattern kind of happens. I'm going to start by taking half of whatever this is right here, and I'm going to bring the sign with it. So half of 4 is going to give me 2, or plus 2. And then I'm going to take this plus 2 and I'm going to square it to get back up here. So I'm going to square that and it's going to give me 4. Okay, so what I'm saying here is if I factored x squared plus 4x plus 4, I would get x plus 2 times x plus 2, or x plus 2 squared. Okay, and so now since I added 4 to this side, I'm going to need to also add 4 over here to this side, again, just to keep things balanced, and that's going to give me 6. Okay, now I'm going to use my square root principle. Okay, so that tells me that if something is squared over here, I can take the square root of both sides. All right, so it's going to leave me with x plus 2 over here, and on this side, it's going to leave me with plus or minus, and I can't take the square root of 6, so I'm just going to leave it as the square root of 6. I can't do that one in my head. All right, and so that's going to give me, I'm going to subtract over my 2. I like to put the minus 2 in front. The reason I do that is because of that thing with the conjugate, kind of like our a plus bi rule. And so that gave me 2 answers. The 2 answers that just gave me, just so you can see them, is going to be negative 2 plus the square root of 6 and negative 2 minus the square root of 6. But you can leave your answer with them all put together like that if you prefer. Okay, 2 times when completing the square gets kind of tricky. One time is if you have something right here that's not an even number, and when you go to take half of it, you end up with some fractions right here. So let me remind you, when you square a fraction, just square the top and square the bottom. And then the other time when completing the square gets a little bit trickier is when you have a lead coefficient. So you can only complete the square the way we just did if there's no lead coefficient on x. Let me also work one that comes out with an imaginary answer just so you can see that as well. So I'm going to take a look at 3x squared plus 18x plus 33. Okay, so this one does have a lead coefficient. This one's kind of nice because I can take that 3 out of everything. It's a common factor. So I can just go ahead and divide through by 3. If I divide 0 by 3, I still end up with 0. Sometimes you end up with something that you can't work like that. We'll come back and take a look at those when we talk about conic sections. But for right now, I'm just going to take that 3 out. So that's going to leave me with x squared plus 6x plus 11. Okay, and then 0 divided by 3 again also just gives me 0. So I can just divide through by that 3 and get it out of the way. Okay, so let's set this one up for completing the square. So I'm going to say x squared plus 6x plus something is equal to, and I'm going to move that 11 over to this side, so that's going to be a negative 11, and I'm going to add something on that side as well. So again, to keep them balanced, I want to add something to each side. Okay, so to complete the square, let's write down our sets of parentheses. And I'm going to take my variable here, so the square root of x squared is x. And now I'm going to take half of my middle term, so half of 6 gives me plus 3. And then I'm going to square that 3 to get my answer right here. So 3 squared gives me 9. And if I add 9 to the left, I need to add 9 to the right as well. So negative 11 plus 9 gives me negative 2. And that being negative also makes this one a little bit different because we're going to end up with an imaginary answer. Okay, let's use our square root principle. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides now. That's going to leave me with x plus 3 over here. And on this side, I've got plus and minus the square root of negative 2. Okay, let me go over here on the side for just a minute and simplify that square root of negative 2. So we've talked before about how that's really the square root of negative 1 times 2, or the square root of I squared times the square root of 2. Remember that I squared is equal to negative 1. Okay, so the square root of I squared gives me I square roots of 2. Okay, so I'm going to replace this with that, so I'm going to end up with x equals negative 3 plus or minus I square roots of 2. So never leave a negative number inside your square root. Always go ahead and take that out and turn it into an imaginary number. Okay, so give the rest of the ones on the worksheet a try and check your selected answers.